2 years ago, Crusader Kings III released, a much anticipated sequel to one of Paradox Interactive's most beloved titles, with its peeled back layer of grand strategy, exposing a finer touch on the human relationships, realm politics and court intrigue of the medieval aristocracy. 2 years on, after steady development, content delays and a few controversies, we have the opportunity to take in a better overall picture of CK3. In this video, we'll go in depth into what the newest Crusader Kings installment offers over its predecessor, and if it's worth your time and money in 2022. This is Crusader Kings III, 2 years in review. If you're after a game centered in medieval Europe, featuring in-depth character mechanics, an embracing of a sarcastic humorous tone, and one that provides immense player agency to do whatever twisted desire they need to ensure the survival of their dynasty, then the Crusader Kings series has it all. In fact, it's the weakness of character play from Paradox Interactive's other titles that gave birth to this series' concept. Unlike other games where players generally control nation-states or empires, in Crusader Kings, you only control one person at a time, an imperfect person with their own traits, desires, machinations, and beliefs, and try to escort them through the chaotic and unforgiving maze that is medieval politics. It's a fundamentally divergent concept that made Crusader Kings II, released in 2012, stand out from earlier Paradox games and attracted a wider audience that perhaps may have been disinclined to the more militaristic empire-building mechanics of other Paradox titles. The Crusader Kings series was thus known for its intimate scope, brilliant role-playing experience, and the ability for players to craft their own story. Naturally, sales and reputation gained from this release secured the development of a sequel. Crusader Kings III has been developed since 2015, with a major focus on improving the haphazardly cobbled together engine that the second game was limping on. This would allow a cleaner and more powerful engine to run more features, allow for a more detailed world map, and alleviate the performance and stability issues that clouded Crusader Kings II. Crusader Kings III released in September of 2020 and was met with almost universal critical acclaim, and since those 2 years have seen 2 flavor packs, a fully fledged expansion pack, and an event pack arrive as DLCs. So it has to be said that I obviously originally planned for a Crusader Kings III year in review last year, but in my honest opinion, Paradox games almost always release with this sort of air of incompleteness which needs more than a year of post-release development to really fruition into a more worthwhile package. Furthermore, Paradox postponed the first major expansion for the game, Royal Court, citing their lack of satisfaction with the pack's stability and progress. One can presume the COVID-19 pandemic probably affected things, so I wanted to wait until that DLC dropped before I undertook my review. I hope that with this delay I can deliver an even more comprehensive picture of the game. So here it is, the full package analysis. This video will cover the base game and all non-cosmetic DLCs, the Northern Lords Flavor Pack released in March of 2021, the Royal Court Expansion Pack released in February of 2022, the Fate of Iberia Flavor Pack released in June of 2022, and the most recent Friends and Foes Event Pack, which released in September of 2022. This video will also feature much footage recorded from modded gameplay. Because modding is so ingrained within the greater experience of Crusader Kings III, as we'll come to analyze, I'll also make various references to any recommended mods whenever it is fitting to do so. Crusader Kings III is an ambitious step up from its predecessor, but not because it is in any way, shape or form larger in scope. In fact, the campaign features a near identical shaped world map as with Crusader Kings II. The borders overall are pretty similar. What Crusader Kings III brings instead to this scope is more density. There are many more baronies or settlements, which consequently make up more counties, and thus provincial density is increased. The map is still a massive affair though, enough to represent all the major developments of the Middle Ages through the entirety of Europe, the Eurasian steppe, all the way to Mongolia, much of the Tibetan plateau, the entire subcontinent of India, and the Isle of Sri Lanka, the entirety of the Middle East and North Africa, and a huge swathe of sub-Saharan Africa all the way to the Gulf of Guinea. Now, it's important to note first how Crusader Kings parcels out its land within this map. The smallest piece of land is the barony, and within these, holdings can be built, such as cities that are run by mayors, a castle run by a baron, or a church run by a priest. A collection of these settlements organizes into a county, governed by a count or countess, and this is the lowest rank that can be controlled by the player. A county is also the smallest parcel of land that can be exchanged within the game's systems, whether that be warfare or diplomacy or inheritance. So really the county is technically the smallest interactable piece of territory. Several counties will then make up a duchy, ran by a duke or a duchess. Several duchies forms a kingdom, ruled by a king or queen, and finally several kingdoms form an empire, run by an emperor or empress. The world map will also feature several filters which denote the de jure location of duchies, kingdoms, and empires, titles which can be created if a realm encompasses enough land within that entity. This is for the most part pretty much unchanged from Crusader Kings II. Crusader Kings III, however, offers only 2 starting dates for its campaign. These 2 starting dates are specifically curated for historical flavor. These 2 years coincidentally associate themselves with crucial geopolitical developments. The first is 867 AD, smack bang in the Dark Ages or early medieval period, a time of strife and struggle as Europe is the most divided it has been since Charlemagne's death. And infighting across his now partitioned Frankish Empire has his grandsons Lothair, Ludwig the German, Charles the Bold, and Louis the Younger vie for control of Central Europe. Basil I secures the throne of the struggling Byzantine Empire and founds the Macedonian dynasty, whilst the First Bulgarian Empire reaches its zenith. The Great Heathen Army sees the Vikings advance across the realms of Anglo-Saxon Britain, and the Reconquista is in its infancy as the kingdoms of Asturias and Navarra resist the Umayyad occupation of Hispania. The start date of 1066 AD, a time scholars today often call the High Middle Ages, are so called because of the defining events that occurred during this period. It features prominently William the Bastard of Normandy at the eve of his fateful invasion of England, whilst King Harold of Norway is also undertaking his own invasion for his own claim to the English throne. In Iberia, Ferdinand the Great's realm is partitioned into the kingdoms of Galicia, Leon, and Castile, whilst the Almoravid Empire is determined to prevent the fall of Al-Andalus to the new invigorated Christian kingdoms. The Normans under Robert the Fox conquer Sicily and southern Italy, whilst the Seljuk Empire under Alp Arslan begins the Turkic conquest of Asia Minor at the expense of the crumbling Byzantines. The Holy Roman Empire has united the lands of Central Europe under a German Kaiser, representing a period of unusual unity within the Catholic Church, whilst factionalism within the Fatimid Caliphate has weakened the state to the point where the papacy is now seriously considering a bold offensive to take back the Holy Land. Bring on the Crusades. In each of these starting dates, players have access to a recommendation of characters to begin their journeys. These are selected for their easier starting positions or historical flavor, but players can literally select any character from any realm as they wish, whether that be an emperor or a minor count. For new players, I do recommend playing as an independent ruler rather than a vassal under a liege, as it's simply just easier to play as a lord of one's own realm whilst learning the basic mechanics of the game. More advanced players may be more inclined to start as a vassal character in the hope to gain independence or usurp their own liege. The developers in particular recommend the Great Adventurers scenario of 867 and the Rags to Riches campaign of 1066 for new players. and you can switch characters anytime in an ongoing save through an integrated menu button. So if you want, you can play as future characters when they are scripted to appear, such as Genghis Khan when the Mongols arrive. Each of these characters are part of a greater dynasty, and historical authenticity is very much respected within Crusader Kings III. Almost every character and every dynasty is painstakingly reimagined from historical source material. For instance, you can play as Alexios of the Komnenos dynasty. In 1066, he's only a subject dux within the Byzantine Empire, but if you know your history, you'll know that the Komnenos eventually took over the emperorship and initiated the Komnenian Restoration, a period of military, financial, and territorial recovery for the Byzantines. You too can try to roleplay that yourself. You can embark on Viking adventures as one of the infamous warlord Ragnar Lothbrok's sons, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurdur, Snake in the Eye, or Ivar the Boneless. Even houses before they became illustrious, the Habsburg house, one of Europe's most influential dynasties of all time, is playable from the 1066 start date. Here they are led by Count Werner of Aargau, when they were just a minor county in the Swiss Alps under the thumb of the Holy Roman Emperor, making for a challenging but equally enticing rags to riches campaign. Some houses start as unlanded characters. The most interesting of these is probably House Hohenzollern, the future ruling house of Brandenburg, Prussia, and eventually the German Empire. Here in one of my saves, the house is eventually married into the Duchy of Swabia. Frankly, the historicity of this game is just absolutely astounding. The Byzantine Basileus title can be traced all the way back to the first Roman Emperor, Augustus. The Shia Caliphate traced all the way back to the founder of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad. I'm not at all an expert on medieval history, but this is some crazy level of detail crafted into each of the two starting scenarios, and will be a pleasure to dive in for any history buff. If any of these starting characters are not your cup of tea, players can also custom create their own, inserting their creations into the world. This is a feature that has been implemented from the second game, and one of the reasons why the series itself got so popular, by embracing facets of the build your own custom character model from the role-playing genre. Similarly, you can edit the coat of arms of your custom house. With the Better Coat of Arms Designer mod, a greater variety of adjustments and detailing can also be done. So, Crusader Kings III features a politically dense world map. It's got hundreds of playable characters within their historic dynasties, or you can create your own, each of them with varying titles as either independent rulers or bearing allegiance to a higher lord, playable across two scenarios that feature the medieval world at the apex of geopolitical drama. It's fascinating stuff, but you might be wondering, what is the ultimate goal of the game? Well, like many Paradox games, there is certainly no defined end condition. It's a sandbox after all, so you can set whatever objective you desire. The game does technically end at the year 1453, the year Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, and the date historians generally attribute at the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance. Regardless, the point of Crusader Kings is the journey and experience in between. It's a forge your own destiny scaled to a dynastic level, where you traverse through generations and generations of characters as they inherit the titles before them. So unlike other RPGs, death is not the end of your journey, it's simply the beginning of your heir's journey, and so players are encouraged to concentrate on the bigger, longer term picture. Ultimately, I find the most rewarding objective, and the one the game I think intends, is to increase your dynasty's splendor, whether your house lives on as the dominant dynasty for a given realm, whether your house can boast it has more members across all the monarchies of Europe, or whether you want to paint the map one color to ensure that only your house is the one that matters. There's so many ways to play this game and get fulfillment that ultimately the objective doesn't really matter at all. Pick a character and let the story play itself. Overall, Crusader Kings III is virtually the same premise from Crusader Kings II, but the extra density in its world map design breathes an even broader historical context by allowing an expanded representation of more realms, characters, and dynasties. Authenticity is surprisingly well documented on a macroscopic level. And although Crusader Kings II has more bookmarked start dates compared to Crusader Kings III, in my opinion this title has two very well curated and highly developed scenarios with plenty of interesting characters of focus. Nevertheless, I would have loved to have a starting date that begins around the 1200s for a later Medieval Ages campaign, sometime right about when Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde begin to ramp up. And although the premise looks daunting, Crusader Kings III actually has a pretty decent tutorial. It's obvious the dev team have devoted a lot into trying to appeal yet again to even more potential players, because traditionally Paradox titles have had very bad tutorials. Crusader Kings III is a far cry from the second-rate clunky feel of its predecessor, with an improved iteration of Paradox Interactive's proprietary Clausewitz engine. Even the developers of Crusader Kings II have admitted that the engine running that game was held together by tape and needed a massive overhaul. One thing that immediately stands out is the look and feel of the user interface, a much more professional, clean, and easy on the eyes UI. A vast improvement from Crusader Kings II, perhaps even that was outdated for its time. I'd even go as far to say that perhaps CK3 has the best user interface in any Paradox game to date. In the main UI screen, you have a constant view of your current ruler, which you can select to bring up a detailed character panel. Otherwise, it will show also your character's current primary tile, their house and dynasty, their religious faith, and their culture as the major components of character interactivity. On the right side of the screen is tabbed all the management aspects such as military, the council, intrigue, and decisions, including the royal court if applicable. I love the separation of mechanical subsystems here. Everything about your character in Dynasty is entirely pushed towards the lower left, whilst the more benign tasks of realm management are restricted to the right side of the screen. For a game with a steep learning curve with various subsystems and mechanics available to the player, this separation of menus is an underappreciated aspect, especially for newer players. UI placement has been a persistent malice in Paradox games, and especially Crusader Kings II, where everything is confusingly forced into the top left corner. I also especially like how Crusader Kings III handles their notification system. Pressing matters that require immediate attention appear at the top as flag posts, whilst minor or inconsequential events in your realm will filter onto the bottom right. Crusader Kings II also had a problem with delivering information to the player. Overall, it is a gulf over the predecessor. The improvement in character models is also super apparent. Not just simple portraits anymore, but fully animated and diverse three-dimensional models, covering a range of cultures, ages, and genders, taking into account all different traits and birth defects. And they will always pose with their spouse, so in a time period where marriage is sacrosanct and oftentimes dynasty defining, you can quickly gauge which houses have been connected in matrimony, giving information to the player on developing political ties across the game world, or you can use it as a system to find potential rivals to cuckold. This addition to the series literally puts a face to the story in a much more poignant manner, adding a degree of characterization unprecedented in a grand strategy game. With the event system, you can see them truly live out their life as they encounter obstacles, make decisions, or perform deeds. And modders have had a field day with this new engine feature by porting in unique costumes, hairstyles, even more model variations entirely. Ethnicities and portraits expanded is a recommended mod here to improve the variety of cultural representation. With the Royal Court DLC, the graphics are taken to an even greater height, with the expansion's addition of a fully three-dimensional view of the player's court, as long as they are a king or emperor, hence the royal. Here, characters take to life as they can be seen priding over their followers and subjects, wear regalia and adorn themselves in jewels, silks and ornaments, be seen interacting with guests or supplicating to their liege. Several thematic court designs, depending on culture and location, bring some variety to different playthroughs, and you can visit other rulers' courts as well. Even this is an area modders have expanded into, the Community Flavor Pack introducing some renowned courts of the medieval era, expressed in explicit detail, such as the Great Palace of Constantinople, seat of the Byzantine Empire, or the Lateran Palace, the seat of the papacy. It is one of the great highlights of the features available to this iteration of the Clausewitz engine, which adds a separate moddable sub-interface to the main world map view, a chance for players to look away from the vastness of their realm or the world and have a chance to cozy up in the confines of their own court. It's like taking a pit stop at a roadside tavern after a long day traversing an open world RPG. Although I appreciate the extra density of the world map, I thought that it was a disappointing rendition of the Eurasian and African continents. Firstly, there's only 5 climactic zones entirely, which dictate the world's different terrain textures. As such, it feels as if the world map was painted with just 5 color palettes. And it's not nearly as detailed as I would like it to be, and historically inaccurate even so at some places. Cities such as Tarsus and Corinth are slightly off, for instance. Perhaps it's just a representation of population dispersion during the Middle Ages, but the map when zoomed in is just frankly boring to look at. There's not enough urban sprawl, unique features, or signs of humanity across it, just a monotonous expanse of castles, temples, and towns. This is an obvious design decision, as the game is more character driven and less of a realm management than other Paradox titles, but given Crusader Kings II had a similarly dull map design, I was hoping for an improvement here. However, I do recommend the Holding Sprawl mod, as it adds barracks, farmlands, windmills, camps, the host of different buildings to dot the landscape and make it seem more alive. I compare Crusader Kings III's map to another Paradox game, a recent one in Imperator Rome, released a year before this game in 2019. It features a much more colourful and detailed world map. It's a glaring contrast. So for Crusader Kings III, it's not the prettiest, accurate or intricate game map in the Paradox interactive lineup, but I guess it is functional enough for what the game entails. Crusader Kings III sports a bold yet effective soundtrack, one that isn't ambitious or adventurous enough to win any plaudits, but one that provides a sustained combination of calming, soothing backdrops with appropriate amounts of bravado to match the feudal, holy and often grandiose atmosphere of this middle-age themed game. Most of the base game vanilla tracks revolve around flutes, church choirs, angelic vocals and soft plucks of the lute. However, there are still a selection of more epic, bigger sounding motion picture tracks such as those involving warfare or victory, and these have to be given credit for their appropriate bravado. If there was one movie soundtrack that has a lot of resemblance to Crusader Kings III's, I would point to the Chronicles of Narnia soundtrack by Harry Gregson Williams. The DLCs ramp up the soundtracks a notch further with their own collection of, in my opinion, even better soundtracks, and some of them diverse enough to offer less of a Eurocentric feel in the base game. Here we have some Viking ferocity in the Northern Lords DLC. or a taste of the exotic Orient with the Fate of Iberia DLC. So yeah, a breath of much needed but well earned investment into an often overlooked experience of grand strategy titles, especially Paradox games which have traditionally lacked a compelling soundtrack. CK3 however delivers a pretty strong effort on the musical front. Performance has markedly improved over the 2-year lifespan of Crusader Kings III. Shockingly demanding and littered with bugs, CK3 had a particularly bad reputation at launch for also crashing at the most asinine of times. But it is safe to say that this front has vastly improved. The main menu no longer eats up all of your GPU or RAM, which it used to for some reason. Late game lag, a general problem with all grand strategy games, has noticeably been better. There are still instances of FPS spiking, such as in the Royal Court screen in particular, but overall it's a much smoother affair than at launch. Now comparatively, the engine also seems to perform much better than its contemporaries, such as Imperator Rome or its prequel The Second Crusader Kings. The new engine is also extremely mod stable, in that outdated or conflicting mods will not usually result in a crash or corrupt your save game, so mod enjoyers can, for the most part, load in a good sized number of modifications without much fear. Paradox games have never been too demanding, but with this game's inclusion of 3D models, animations, and more detailed rendered scenes and objects, especially with the Royal Court DLC, if you want it to look and run pretty, I would suggest aiming for a decent mid-tier graphics card, but otherwise I'd still place CK3 in the category of games where graphics don't really matter. In some aspects, Crusader Kings III represents an improvement over its predecessor, and in other aspects, it's an absolute triumph in the grand strategy genre. Rendering characters to life in 3-dimensional is a huge game changer because games in this genre honestly haven't really innovated past the outdated portrait model. This is a feature I hope to see in upcoming Paradox titles such as Victoria 3. It's no doubt that Crusader Kings III, for all its difficulty and complexity as we'll come to see, has improved its appeal visibly by investing into a refined and polished new iteration of its engine. Crusader Kings III rids the notion of controlling nations as separate entities, where instead it's the people behind the flag that matters. As such, it has some of the deepest character mechanics of any strategy game, and those mechanics inadvertently become the majority of the player's focus. So even though it is a fundamental part of the gameplay loop, for brevity's sake, we'll treat the character mechanics as a separate entity. Characters are molded primarily by two things, their traits and attributes. Traits dictate how they perceive the world around them, and attributes dictate how effectively they can respond to it. 3 personality traits define a character, and they are attained over their course of adolescence. They are unchangeable, and are never really outright good or bad, everyone's different after all. Besides purely numerical buffs and debuffs to attributes and other parameters, traits can affect interactions and decision making. A sadistic character may be sinful to Catholics, but it allows hostile schemes against one's own children, unless of course they're also honest, which makes them stressed as well. Brave characters are awesome fighters, but have a tendency to get injured or die in battle. Greedy characters will gain stress every time they do a charitable favor, like sending gifts, whilst a gregarious character will lose stress greatly if they participate in a feast, even more so if they are a drunkard. When characters become an adult, which is 16 in this game, they will also develop an educational trait, further bolstering their attribute of study, depending if they were a competent student or not. Besides these, characters can also acquire commander traits if they pursue a military upbringing, affecting how they lead others and perform in battle. There are also a variety of miscellaneous traits acquired through a person's life, depending on the pursuit of certain lifestyles that can make one adept at the respective attributes. Others come about when fame is garnered. Participating in holy wars as a Christian character bestows the Crusader trait. Being born as a child while a parent is the Byzantine emperor provides the born in the purple trait. And others acquired through less scrupulous means. Excommunication or being outed as a witch, a murderer, or a performer of carnal sins doesn't exactly help your prestige. And there's a whole line of genealogical traits that can be inherited. Beauty, intelligence, and fertility modifiers can be passed down and reinforced through the generations. Here is where Crusader Kings III excels in representing sheer diversity, as every character generated in the game is their own unique amalgamation of traits and therefore desires and ambitions that help shape the way they think and change the world. It also affects how the challenge of your personal game can rise and fall depending on the characters you inherit. Maybe you start off as a highly skilled, perceptive individual with great traits, but your heir can easily be a low attribute, badly traded dud. It's just the luck of life sometimes. But that doesn't mean you have completely no sway, as we'll come to see. Crusader Kings III offers various tools to the player to provide as many creative means as possible to outmaneuver a problem. Educating children, for instance, can provide opportunities to reinforce certain traits whilst discarding others. Children are, after all, much more impressionable and fickle than adults, so this is one of the most effective methods to secure at least a somewhat competent heir. You can also selectively breed your children with someone possessing congenital traits. It's a chance their children might inherit that gene and thus secure a bit of an advantage for later generations of your dynasty. Just be really careful, of course, about inbreeding. Traits also have an effect on generated nicknames. William the Bastard is of course a legitimized bastard, but he gets the Conqueror nickname when he takes the English crown. Prince Louis the Stammerer reflects his stuttering congenital trait, but nicknames can also generate for a variety of other reasons, like impaling too many prisoners or consecrating a bloodline. If you like this feature, I also recommend Nicknames Plus and Extended Nicknames, which together add more than 400 unique modded nicknames to add even more flavor. All these traits are compiled into essentially an invisible spreadsheet that calculates the character's attributes, determining their proficiency at related tasks. Characters also choose a lifestyle in any of the 5 attributes, representing their own life experience in improving and potentially mastering it. If the character chooses a lifestyle that is in line with their education, they will further receive an experience boost. So as this lifestyle experience is slowly accrued over one's lifetime, the actions they do, events that can happen, they can be then invested into 3 different focus trees, and they can purchase perks to improve attributes and introduce mechanics for them to play with. Diplomacy, for instance, is split into mastering foreign affairs, benevolence over subjects, and solidifying familial relations. If your ruler invests into the Befriend perk here, they get access to the Befriend character interaction, a powerful tool to appease others and provide stress relief in future interactions. Finishing this entire tree bestows the Patriarch lifestyle trait, increasing fertility, stress loss, and opinions of all house and dynastic members. Each of these trees are filled with different perks that can make each new character have vastly different experiences from their previous character, greatly enhancing replayability. You could have a valiant warrior whose virtue stands above all, for his son to be a scheming manipulator that uses intrigue at every opportunity. And characters aren't locked into lifestyle focuses either. They can change once every 5 years, so you can flexibly acquire new perks that benefit you without feeling tunnel visioned into one particular path. For instance, I feel the Truth is Relative perk is such a great one to pick up straight away, as it is the first in its tree and thus only requires minimal investment in intrigue. And some other powerful ones could be considered, even if they require a bit more investment into a tree, such as the Know Thyself perk, notifying the player 1 year before their character's natural death. It's pretty handy. There's also a secondary attribute called Prowess. This illustrates the character's adeptness at single combat, and it will affect how they perform in battle as a knight, how they perform in duels, and how they resist physical skill checks such as assassination attempts. This entire system is a general upgrade from Crusader Kings II, which had a similar but vastly inferior focus system. With lifestyles and focus trees, deeper and more meaningful character progression is available to the player. It adds even more of an RPG element to character specialization. The title system makes and breaks Crusader Kings. Wars will be fought, heads will be chopped, and dynasties ruined, all so that characters can add a shiny new title to their resume. We briefly covered the title system in the premise and setting section, but we'll expand on it here. Here's King William. He's a couple of decades older after his conquest of the English throne. He's got a fair few titles, 19 of them in fact. He directly controls a few counties, but the majority of his kingdom is delegated to a few dukes and counts under his vassalage. His grandson Lionel is the Duke of East Anglia, his son William is Duke of Kent, and some Anglo-Saxon dukes such as Northumbria. His dukes in turn will have their own vassals. Duke Richard of Mercia has the Earls of Staffordshire and Herefordshire as his vassals. Each character may also possess claims, a legal right to obtain a title which is not in their possession, and there's a few types. An implicit claim is given to the eligible heirs that will inherit the titles. It's implied that they will receive the title, but it's not a guarantee. In this scenario's example, William's grandson from his second son, Lionel, is next in line to the English throne in this male preference succession model. So he gets an implicit claim to the throne as an heir apparent, but William's still alive third son, William the Red, also gets an implicit claim to the throne. Because, well, he was the heir presumptive before Lionel was born, so you can see how this can unravel into some potential chaos, as I came to personally experience. When King William finally died, a very young and very wounded 5-year-old Lionel becomes king. Almost immediately, his uncle William the Red begins plotting for the throne, because his claim to the Kingdom of England is now a pressed claim. It's not a rightful claim, but nevertheless a legally strong one. This allows him to start a civil war, deposing Lionel, so I just call it and decide to continue the campaign as William II. Now Lionel will now get pressed claims to the throne because he was, in his eyes, illegally usurped and may prove to be a threat in the future if he isn't dealt with. Meanwhile, this new King William II has a firstborn. Yep, you guessed it, it's another prince named William, and he receives implicit claims to the throne because he's now the new heir apparent. There are also unpressed claims, and these are considered legally tenuous at best. Usually they are pressed claims that are inherited by sons and become unpressed. This is to represent the fact that claims lose legitimacy over generational gaps. So if Lionel decides to not push his pressed claim, any children he will father will only get unpressed claims, which are harder to push, and their children won't get claims at all. Unpressed claims can also be fabricated or offered to the recipient. In a sense, these are temporary claims that have been issued outside the inheritance chain, and will dissolve upon the character's death. These can be for religious reasons or territorial disputes. It gives the claimant a prerogative to press it if they wish. So the titles and claim system is a lot more complex compared to CK2. Trade-off, the learning curve, is a lot more difficult, but I feel like it provides the depth and nuance necessary to portray the often confusing and convoluted politics of the medieval era. Fighting off usurpers and claimants to titles, fighting for someone else's titles, it's all par the course for medieval Europe. I mean, in my own example, I pretty much had a mini War of the Roses. Savvy players can definitely use the system to their advantage, with a variety of creative mechanics we'll explore in the gameplay section. Each character has their own set of resources: gold, prestige, piety, and renown. Importantly, these are not tied to the realm, but a per character basis, so a son won't inherit his father's resources, but builds it separately even when he is not the player character. So every single character in the game is generating their own gold, accruing their own prestige, devoting their own piety, and contributing to their own dynasty's renown, all simultaneously. So if your character is an independent ruler, it is their coffers that are being invested into their respective realms, since there's no concept of national economy or national treasury. Prestige, piety, and renown also accumulate towards a secondary resource. Fame represents the reputation of the character over their lifespan. Every time characters gain prestige, they also gain an equal amount of fame. Likewise, the level of devotion is linked to piety. These levels mostly improve opinion from everyone else, but having enough fame and devotion is a key part of unlocking some of the later, more powerful mechanics, such as being able to form one's own kingdom or creating a holy order. We'll explore these in the gameplay section. Each character forms an opinion of every other character in the game, and can form relationships, whether meaningful or abrasive. This is again an extension of Crusader Kings III's far-reaching mechanics, which add immense depth to characters, but allows interactivity between each and every one of them. There's tons of factors that can skew opinions back and forth. Players will have to learn the modifiers over time, as it's deceptively nuanced. The character screen will also prominently display the character's spouse. Now, in Crusader Kings, spouses wield great influence, and they can be a strong assistance to a ruler, especially if they also possess quite good traits and attributes themselves. As a result, much focus is given to the marriage system. This is made especially easy with a tool to filter all the eligible candidates. You can even use this tool to find potential claimants to other titles you want to eventually inherit into. And marrying sons and daughters to foreign realms is a powerful way to secure alliances. Likewise with children, as having capable heirs is almost as important as the current character. An improved ward system allows adults to take over the education of their close family's children, or designate guardians for them. This allows players to sort of micromanage the education pathway of heirs and heiresses, to ensure that they either have a suitably proficient son to inherit their titles, or a suitably mannered daughter to send off to marriage. Although this system is already quite deep, the Social Relations Expanded mod introduces even more modifiers, such as mutual acquaintances, hate by association, and familial friends. This mod drastically improves the impact of opinion modifiers and reduces the fickleness that is often associated with vanilla base game, where characters tended to change their opinion as the wind blows. Every character has this measure of mental health called stress, and it's shown in the lower left. It acts as a gameplay barrier to discourage characters from behaving differently their traits would otherwise suggest. For instance, forgiving and trusting characters gain stress if they choose to execute prisoners rather than release them. Wrathful characters can lash out randomly against others, giving themselves stress relief but not really helping themselves diplomatically, whilst the loss of a child pretty much stresses out everyone but the least emphatic. The stress system is also separated into 3 levels that increase severity if characters are continually stressed out. If stress exceeds these thresholds, characters receive a mental break, often forcing them to adopt a coping mechanism. Later mental breaks after even more sustained stress can cause debilitating penalties such as health and fertility maladies, lunacy or depression, even potential abdication, heart attacks or suicide. So it goes without saying to try to keep stress down. What this translates to the player is actually a pretty neat encouragement to roleplay their character's traits, rather than caving into a results-oriented gameplay. It discourages an otherwise compassionate and generous character from being pushed into a tyrannical mindset, whilst offering opportunities for more evil characters to surrender to their vices, bringing the player outside their comfort zone of neutrality. Characters can also have obligations towards others, or debts that need to be paid. This sort of liability is represented in-game as hooks. Convincing someone else usually requires one of these hooks, a favor if you will, quid pro quo. There's various ways to obtain hooks: doing a favor for someone so they are indebted to you, releasing prisoners from custody, or fabricating hooks with the intrigue perk. You can even blackmail characters if you know secrets about them. In this campaign, I found out one of my vassal practices witchcraft. I threatened to expose it in exchange for a strong hook. Househeads even have hooks on all children born in the family, so I can hook one of my sons to become a monk, so he can be disinherited from any claims to the throne. If you're a forgiving character, abandoning hooks also gives stress relief. We'll explore the various uses of hooks as we proceed further in the gameplay section. Characters can also sort of brute force their way with other people through terror. A character's dread can be accumulated through violent and terrible acts that inspire fear in others. Heinous acts of cruelty, imprisoning characters, etc, etc. It all builds up this resource called dread. This creates intimidation where other people feel terrified and will never directly oppose that dreadful character, making it possible to disregard tyrannical modifiers and convince them another way. But beware, a little too much of something is never a good thing, and especially dreadful characters may eventually fall off the mental deep end, if you know what I mean. Like, how about creating a forest of dead prisoners? Right. There's also a pretty deep, but not really well explained health system. Unlike stress or dread, there's no exact indication of a character's health besides a vague tooltip. Good, feeling fine, sick, or at death's door. They're all suggestions of how fragile or how healthy one is, and I believe this is a way for the game to increase risk and reduce the ability for the player to game the system. As characters go about their lives, any manner of injuries or diseases can affect their health. Smallpox epidemics, for instance, are rampant during the medieval world. Characters may duel one another and be rendered injured, and of course warfare can permanently maim an individual. This manifests in traits as well, which penalize attributes and can put the character one step closer to death. The one feedback the game does provide is a warning to let the player know when a character is on death's door. It's not guaranteed, but it's a warning that something is imminent. So make sure their affairs are in order because the Reaper is coming. Finally, to complement the RPG feeling even further, an inventory system is now available, where characters can wear regalia, they can equip weapons, adorn armor, or hold trinkets, varieties of which will be encountered as campaigns go on. Characters with money to spare can also commission artifacts, beginning an event chain to seek out their desired piece. All artifacts have a durability and inheritance system as well, so family heirlooms can be passed down, stolen, claimed, and reclaimed all over again. This feature was launched in a major patch alongside the Royal Court DLC. Resultingly, many introduced mechanics in that DLC directly synergize with this system, which in vanilla is admittedly a bit bare bones. There's frankly no other game like this, one that offers the character evaluation and interaction that Crusader Kings III provides. Not even in RPGs can you generate character traits, attributes, and backstories this detailed. And the crucial part is that the player doesn't get to create new characters every generation, because children will also be subject to some randomness. It's just like real life. You sort of have to play with the hand you're dealt with, whether it's bad traits, sickness, stress events, or untimely deaths. And that makes Crusader Kings III such an enticing yet challenging character manager. The gameplay loop of Crusader Kings III is significantly different than other Paradox interactive games. Sure, it's still a real-time grand strategy game at the end of the day, but instead of proactively doing something, Crusader Kings III delivers more of a patient, slowly developing narrative that is shaped by events happening outside your control. Your character is one out of many thousand in this great big simulation trying to respond to those changes, and thus it allows for an intimate experience of being able to forge your own story, your own history in this dynamic world. It's as much role-playing as it is grand strategy. As a result, unlike in other Paradox titles of conquest or civilization building, CK3 has a much more limited scope on dynastic longevity. Because humans are ultimately mortal and only live for a maximum of around 60 years in this game, the campaign introduces to us a deeper dynastic system to compel the player to think about the longer term picture. In CK3, a dynasty is defined as an unbroken noble line descending from the same landed character that founded that dynasty. Any independent rulers or spouses from that dynasty contribute to its renown. As a result, it's not just about your character, it's about making sure your other family members from that dynasty are well established themselves. Characters will be part of smaller divisions of dynasties called houses. They can be the founding house themselves or a splintered off group called a cadet branch. Usually the first male in line will inherit the house all the way through, like how the heirs of Duke Richard II inherit House Normandy, whilst the brothers usually branch off into their own house, such as the Evreux, the O, and the Brion branches, but they're still part of the greater Normandy dynasty. House heads are leaders of their respective branch and exercise great powers. They can legitimize their own bastards, call house members to war, and have hooks over all house descendants. Dynastic heads are even more powerful, and this is decided by whichever house head has the greatest military strength. Dynasty heads can claim titles from other members, force a war between two members to end, and even denounce and disinherit other members altogether. As renown accumulates, the level of splendor of a dynasty will also improve. Many players, including myself, consider this the main scoreboard of CK3. Usually my ultimate goal of a campaign is for my chosen dynasty to reach a legendary or fabled status. AI characters will also view renowned dynasties in much greater light, making it exceptionally easy to find prestigious marriage candidates. For instance, as the Habsburgs, I was able to marry off my daughter to the Polish throne matrilineally, which means all future descendants of the Union and resultingly future rulers of Poland will be of the Habsburg house. Or you can secure powerful military alliances, such as with the Byzantines, here by marrying off my niece. But renown also has a greater purpose in legacies. As a dynasty head, renown can be spent to unlock perks that provide bonuses to all dynasty members across the game world. The blood tree, for instance, contains lucrative congenital trait modifiers that would help a dynasty focusing on, let's say, keeping it in the family. Like I'm currently doing in my Habsburg campaign, trying to breed or inbreed a line of pure-blooded descendants. The warfare branch is extremely useful for a conquest playstyle. If you envisage your dynasty going to war a lot in the future, then this is the path to go. If your dynasty is trying to kill or seduce their way to the top, the Guile branch contains great scheme, success chance, and secrecy bonuses for all those mischievous dark arts. This system essentially nullifies part of the problem of inheritance, where dynasties actually get slightly stronger and stronger over time as renown accumulates. So even if your current crop of children are all morons and dimwits, you can rest assured that legacies will at least carry over to later, hopefully better generations. The flavor packs provide some unique legacies to certain cultures, and the mod More Legacies provides even more expansion to this mechanic. Of course, religion plays a crucial role in medieval politics, and many faiths have been adapted into the game world. The two dominant Christian denominations, Catholicism and Orthodoxy, form the major religious centres of Europe, but smaller sects such as Insularism in Ireland, Coptic in Egypt, and Apostolic in Armenia are also represented. This goes for Islam as well, with the Ash'ari Sunni and Ismaili Shia schools dominating the Middle East and North Africa, but there are minor sects such as Ibadism and the Iberian Muwalladism. Quite a lot of possible and historic religions are also implemented. You can, for instance, go back in time and adopt the pagan, Hellenic, or Persian Zoroastrian religion. Throughout the campaign, events will unfold that can sprout heretical sects in pockets of the world, such as Catharism or Paulicianism. Sometimes when a character is stressed, they may adopt a new religion as a coping mechanism, such as here the Queen of Jerusalem adopting Adamitism, a form of Christianity that embraces nudity. Apostasy events and theological debates offer the chance for rulers to even switch their realm's primary religion. Of course, we haven't even covered the breathtaking amount of Asian, steppe, Scandinavian, and African religions, which are also as diverse and intricately detailed, each offering a unique campaign experience if adopted. playing in the 867 year start date has more options for players looking at more exotic faiths, as in this period, Islam and Christianity are less established, so Khuzaite Judaism, Nestorianism, and a stronger block of Slavic, Germanic, and Norse pagan religions are available. Each religion has their own tenets, doctrines, and traits they consider sinful and virtuous. This affects all manner of what characters can or cannot do, or whether they will be upheld or frowned upon for doing it. The Norseman, a Satru faith for instance, has the warmonger tenet, which allows characters in this faith to initiate wars of conquest and invasion that are legally impossible by many other faiths. And since it is considered an unreformed pagan faith, they can use armies to raid settlements, acquiring loot which can be brought back home. Abrahamic religions have the heads of faith doctrine, which enables a holy leader, i.e. the Pope for Catholicism, the Ecumenical Patriarch for Orthodoxy, and the Caliphs in Islam. Interacting with these religious figures unlocks unique faith-related mechanics. A pious character can request gold in exchange for piety, they can purchase claims outright, or request another to be excommunicated. You can also convince characters to take the vows and become monks or nuns, improving your standing with the church. Each faith has an opinion about other faiths, whether they consider them righteous, astray, hostile, or evil. For instance, Catholicism considers nobody else righteous but themselves. It considers other Christian sects astray, it considers Christian heresies to be hostile, and every other faith evil. This affects opinions of characters, so it's a lot harder to become friends with a Muslim character as a Catholic, for instance, but it also affects marriage acceptability and unlocks holy wars, which we'll cover more in the military section. The religious mechanics also allow the creation of new faiths, if characters have enough piety, which may be beneficial to tweak the doctrines and tenets to the player's benefit. But be warned, switching faiths often results in hostility, as the realm will now be considered apostate. Furthermore, each faith will consider 5 sites across the game world holy. Controlling these as a religion gives unique, global bonuses to all characters of the faith, giving an extra cooperative edge for all characters of a faith to strive towards. This is a great feature that defines an overarching religious objective and can decide the target of holy wars, such as where the Crusades will be. Overall, the macroscopic representation of religion is extremely detailed, diverse, and frankly impressive. However, I actually think it is poorly implemented at the micro level, as there can only be one religion per county. Populations weren't simply this or that religion. There were majorities here and minorities there, but the game struggles to encapsulate that nuance. A percentage counter, like in Imperator Rome or from historical Total War games, would describe faith proliferation more clearly and assist the player on choosing whether to adopt an aggressive, anti-heretic posture or a more accepting multi-faith stance. Similarly to religions, realms on the world map are separated into various cultures, which is even more numerous and detailed. Each culture has cultural pillars which define their aesthetic and language, traditions which affect various numerical modifiers and mechanics, and a general ethos which encourages a certain playstyle. Bellicose cultures such as the Castilians receive buffs to improve their military, so warmongering players may be more inclined to roleplay this culture as an example. Similarly to dynasties, there are also cultural heads, and it's defined by a character that rules over the most counties of said culture. They can reform the culture by swapping or adding traditions, but these take some time, some decades in fact, to go into effect. With the Royal Court DLC, cultures can further be diverged or hybridized for a hefty prestige cost. This allows the ethos, languages, aesthetics to be tweaked. These two mechanics improve the game's creative aspects yet again, but also is a great flavorful mechanic to represent cultural adaptation. Some cultural changes are historic and locked into decisions. For instance, one of the major cultural shifts represented in the game is William the Conqueror, who was Norman, adopting the English culture by combining Norman and the resident Anglo-Saxon culture. Each culture will also develop technological, legal, and ideological advances differently from one another. This innovation system is a relic from the previous Crusader Kings and other Paradox titles such as Europa Universalis, essentially the game's research system to emulate the slow and methodical process of societal progression. It helps to define the limitations available in each medieval period, so that trebuchets and crossbowmen, for instance, don't appear until at least the High Medieval era, and that impenetrable castle wall upgrades won't be available in the early game. Over the years, these innovations steadily progress. Innovations unlocked will then be available for use to all characters of that culture. Cultural heads can further choose an innovation fascination, which improves the speed at which that innovation is unlocked, and this is scaled by the cultural head's learning ability. That's an incentive to improve this attribute. Some cultural ethos, such as the Greek bureaucratic ethos, also gives a bonus to fascination progress, so the Byzantines are great at unlocking technologies faster than their counterparts. As a result, innovation progression is perfectly valid playstyle in CK3, where generations of characters can be groomed to value the learning attribute, giving a long-term technological advantage over other cultures. Similar to religions, cultures do fall apart on the micro scale by being misrepresented in counties where there can only be one culture. But the ambitious mod cultural and religious minorities helps to alleviate both these issues by introducing minority faiths and cultures. Resultingly, there's also laws and decisions around acceptance, toleration, or persecution, adding much needed depth that synergizes with the vast cultural variety that the game offers. Now we arrive at the juicy parts of actually ruling one's realm. Firstly, each character will have a domain limit. This is defined by their feudal title and improved by their stewardship attribute. It limits the amount of holdings a character can directly rule effectively, so it encourages excess domains to be handed over to vassals as minor lords to rule in their stead. This is a pretty big jump from other games where players may feel like they warrant ruling over everything as a king or emperor, but it's actually a much more accurate portrayal of the feudal hierarchy. Kings and emperors usually only directly ruled over certain estates and a limited amount of crown lands, whilst the majority of their realm is governed by vassals. So if you've got excess land, start handing them out to counts and dukes. Rulers can then invest their personal fortune into enriching these estates. As explained before, each county is either one of three holdings: a city, a temple, or a castle. Cities are delegated to mayors in a republican system, and temples are run by the religious clergy, so they manage their own domain for the most part. A member of the feudal society can only interact with the castle holding, which acts as the seat of power of the entire county. Each county has its own variables. Its level of control indicates the grip the government has over the county. Lower levels reduce taxes and levies. Development indicates the infrastructure and urbanization the county experiences. Higher levels increase tax, levies, and the supply limit. Popular opinion indicates the happiness of the citizens towards their ruling character. And finally, we have the county's faith and culture as explored previously. The construction of buildings directly benefits tax income, or the available levy pool, whilst the castle holding level itself can be upgraded to provide many buffs, as well as making them more impervious from sieges. Each duchy capital also has a building slot for a unique tree of powerful global buffs, but unless you're controlling a bunch of these capitals, which is never really the case since these lands should be given to vassal duchies as a result of the domain limit, you're not going to have too many of these to take advantage of. Some settlements have unique buildings such as Rome's Colosseum, Toledo's city walls, or Constantinople's Hagia Sophia. But these are uninteractable as they are pre-built when the game starts, so I consider them more as world wonders rather than county infrastructure. So one can see that it doesn't make much sense to build in domains you don't directly control and won't be inherited down the line. Improving things for a vassal results in them getting the tax and levy gain, with little overall gain for your own character. So it makes temple and city holdings almost forgettable in the grand scheme of things. One can also see that domain management essentially boils down to either improving income or increasing the number of levy peasants you can call up for war. It's kind of two-dimensional and limited. Perhaps it is entirely a realistic portrayal of medieval governorship, and the fact the game does really stress character mechanics over realm management, but many players may feel it limits the feeling of rulership too much, which I agree. There should be more variety, more interesting projects for rulers to invest in, and more meaningful methods for rulers to exercise their authority over their realm. Vassals will manage their own designated realm, so lieges don't have to. They contribute a percentage of their tax revenue and levy pool to their liege through a feudal contract. These can be modified to be higher, but it's considered an act of tyranny. However, hooks on vassals can be dispensed here to remove the tyranny modifier. Likewise, vassals may have hooks on their liege to lower their own vassal contributions. There's also several special rights in contracts that can be bestowed upon vassals. So really, as a ruler with vassals, the major part about realm management is about keeping those vassals satisfied or distracted. Too many grumpy, powerful vassals is a recipe for civil war, because they simply control most of your land. Overall jurisdiction, or what vassals can and can't do, is controlled by crown authority. Higher levels of authority is disliked by vassals as it restricts their own authority and forces higher contributions, but it's necessary for rulers who wish to exert more concrete control over their realm, and it's also required for things like changing succession laws. It's not all a one-way street though. Happy vassals can periodically offer gifts such as prestige and gold, and invite their lieges to hunting trips or feasts, which are great for fostering relationships and reducing stress. Occasionally, outside realms, awed at this spectacle of your rule, may be inclined to become a vassal. Usually this is a same faith or culture realm feeling intimidated, they require immediate protection, or a familial alliance that fosters into a realm's annexation. In this campaign as the Kingdom of Aragon, I married one of the daughters off to the Duke of Barcelona, which secured an alliance, but this alliance then blossomed into a true friendship. With this, the Duke of Barcelona was happily convinced to be absorbed into the Aragon realm as a vassal. In another campaign as the Byzantines, a successful annexation of Georgian lands prompts the Duchy of Alania to be vassalized into the empire, possibly feeling intimidated into being considered a future target. Entrusting who to inherit your realm is another major part of the game. Most feudal systems will involve some form of male preference partition, where titles are spread equally between children upon death, with firstborns receiving the primary title. In this campaign, as the Kingdom of Aragon, King Manuel Juarez actually has 3 kingdom titles, Aragon, Navarra and Valencia, which means that on his death, the realm will be partitioned into 3 independent kingdoms because he has 3 male heirs. Now that's not really a good thing. So what we could do is destroy the other 2 kingdom titles so that the younger sons will instead become counts under their older brother, whilst retaining border integrity of the Aragon realm. Or we can adopt primogeniture. Most players will eventually want to adopt this primogeniture law, as it ensures that only one heir inherits all the titles, adding a degree of stability to succession, but it requires the innovation to be unlocked, which is usually only available in the late medieval era. Also, vassals need to approve of any succession law change, so again, gotta keep them happy or keep them intimidated. Some empires, such as the Holy Roman Empire, have an elective system. This involves elections where powerful vassals cast a weighted vote onto candidates for succession, and this system can be adopted by other empires like the Byzantines. This system greatly ensures vassal loyalty as it potentially opens up the emperorship position to anyone in the realm. But you can take advantage of this as a savvy player, fabricating hooks for instance, blackmailing and forcing vassals to vote for your preferred son to ensure the throne stays within the house. It's added flexibility because you can choose exactly which son can inherit, but with the facade of a democracy. It's cheeky, but not even that far-fetched from what actual emperors did during history. Where Crusader Kings III, in my opinion, falls a bit flat is in matters of warfare. The composition of armies is logical enough. The majority of troop numbers are peasant militia levied from vassals and domains, reinforced by a smaller number of professional men-at-arms regiments, but these require significant gold upkeep. A limited number of knights can also be called to arms. These are vassals or courtiers that can greatly enhance the fighting skill of armies. The higher their prowess, the more damage they inflict in battle, so it's worth it to be constantly on the lookout for them. I find that fighting wars is a great way to capture enemy knights, because you can convince them to join your cause by offering their freedom. Vassals, especially ones that are assigned as marshals, can also recommend new recruits. Characters, however, only have a limited amount of knights that they can field, so this limit can be increased by a manner of methods, such as the character's fame, innovations, and cultural traditions. Rich leaders can complement their armies further by purchasing mercenaries with gold, hired on 3-year fixed contracts that can be renewed. As the game progresses later on and crusades have been unlocked, holy orders will begin appearing for their respective faiths. In this campaign, by the year 1250, Catholic realms have access to calling up the Knights Hospitaller, the Teutonic Order, or the Knights Templar for a cost in piety, if they are at war with someone of at least hostile faith. Characters that are at least a devoted servant ranking in their level of piety can become the patron of their own holy orders, making them free to call up. Because holy orders slowly expand over time to recruit more and more units, they can become a lucrative yet inexpensive source of well-trained troops for holy wars. Holy orders are also another option to disinherit children, by sending to take their vows as a chivalrous order knight. Generally, they will be averse to leaving their home and losing their claims, but if they are attached to a military lifestyle and through the use of hawks, they can be convinced otherwise. Sometimes orders will request one of the sons themselves. CK3 will feature conflicts that range from the pettiest of title disputes to great crusades that can define centuries of geopolitics. Once again, to emphasize the character-heavy nature of this game, declaring war is an interaction against the ruler of another nation. Like other Paradox games, a casus belli is needed, a cause for war, whether that be pressing a claim, conquering de jure territories, or holy wars against hostile faiths. If someone in your court or realm has a claim, you can also declare a war on their behalf, making a greatly indebted vassal in the process. And as a Paradox game, winning wars is dictated by accruing a war score, either by taking objectives, winning open battles, or capturing high-profile characters. Once the war begins, characters raise their armies and march them off to war. Crusader Kings III features a very crude military system compared to other titles on the claws of its engine. There are dice rolls, battle phases, formations, a bit of a rock, paper, scissors unit system, and supply chains, but generally all these mechanics are stripped down to the bare minimum and have little impact. In my experience, numbers of troops and commander skill are the most important factors in determining battle outcomes. What is instead very commonplace is siege warfare, which will make up approximately 3/4 of all battles on the game map. And since every county on the map has at least one castle holding, and the fact that you need to capture these counties to get the controlled territory war score, you can imagine that a lot of sieging needs to be done to actually win wars. Sieging does have some benefits though. You can get a sum of gold after every siege, and can capture enemy characters which can be ransomed, making wars quite revenue generating, to be honest. But again, the constant one-dimensional state of its stripped-down warfare system makes military matters the most boring aspect of Crusader Kings III. Despite these feelings, however, the highlight of every campaign will be the opportunity to fight in a great holy war. That's often a Christian crusade or an Islamic jihad undertaken against a holy site. Great holy wars are called by heads of faiths. For instance, in this campaign, the Catholic Pope calls the game's first crusade against the Fatimid Caliphate to take Jerusalem, whilst in another, a holy war is called in response to the collapse of Byzantine authority in Anatolia against the Sultanate of Rum, a precursor state to the Roman Empire. With this decree, all Catholic rulers will be obliged to either commit troops or contribute gold to the Advent, whilst all Muslim rulers will be obliged to defend. This results in potentially hundreds of thousands of troops committed from both sides, creating one of the great military spectacles in CK3. All Catholic contributors will also select a benefactor. This is an unlanded relative or acquaintance that will receive titles from the conquered lands in the event of victory. This mechanic makes for quite hilarious outcomes. In my English campaign, I selected my character's unmarried, cynical, atheist sister as a benefactor, and she ended up becoming the Queen of Jerusalem when the crusade was eventually victorious and carved out the new Crusader state. This also means that you can't really claim Crusader titles for yourself, although the game does give you an option to continue the campaign instead as the new king or queen. That wasn't an issue in this campaign though, because she ended up becoming a deviant fornicator and giving birth to bastard children, which under Catholic law couldn't inherit the throne, so she had no viable heirs. And so when she died, mysteriously, my own King of England inherited the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Comic relief never disappoints in Crusader Kings III. As a landed character, trusted members from the realm can be installed as counselors to assist the day-to-day management of the realm. Here, a spouse can provide a sizable buff to an attribute of choice. This is why marrying highly skilled characters is beneficial, because it directly complements your player character's own skills. A realm priest of the respective religion will also accompany the council. If they are on good terms with the ruler, they will provide incomes and levies from all temple holdings, and they have access to abilities like fabricating claims, religious conversion, or increasing piety gain through religious relations, their effectiveness scaling with their learning ability. A chancellor is in charge of diplomatic efforts. They can improve foreign relations, domestic vassal opinion, and prestige gain. Stewards can promote culture, increase development, or increase tax gain. Marshals can increase control, improve knights and men-at-arms. They can train commanders or increase the levy size, while spy masters can find secrets or support and disrupt schemes. Each of these counselors, their effectiveness scaling with their respective attribute. Council positions are especially lucrative for vassals to gain more influence, so powerful ones tend to feel disenfranchised if they are not granted a seat at this high table. It's a balancing act for the ruling character. You can either appease a powerful vassal who may be less skilled, or hire a proficient person from the lower ranks, causing distrust among the upper class. It's a dilemma every king or queen will eventually face. However, minor characters also make up a royal court, and Crusader Kings III institutes a host of roles for rulers to placate their underlings. Guests will occasionally visit a ruling character's court. They can be random peasants or unlanded nobility, knights in training, vagrants, or wandering priests. They travel to different courts in an attempt to get employment. As these characters come and go, they can be recruited as a retainer into a courtier position, each one providing unique but minor buffs to various parameters. But there are some important roles here that players generally want to have hired at all times. A competent court physician could be the difference between life and death. They can assist everything from healing injuries or quarantining potentially devastating smallpox outbreaks, or they can offer up some more questionable concoctions. Roles such as bodyguards assist in preventing hostile scheme actions. Court jesters are great at providing periodic stress relief, such as readings from comedies or cheekily stealing clothes from one of your knights, although laughing too hard at some of their jokes may also result in death. Recruiting skilled persons can often be quite expensive if they're highly skilled. I found a great knight candidate once in Gomez, but I couldn't really afford him. Not to worry, he is my cousin's hand in marriage. He joins my court because she's already employed as my court tutor, and voila, I've got a new knight. Prisoners of war or referrals from your vassals are also potential sources of new recruits. CK3 features a rehash of the series' popular intrigue functions, and any ambitious dynasty worth their salt will sooner or later employ some of these darker tactics to fulfill their agendas. To summarize, intrigue is any interaction done in secrecy. Some trivial interactions include swaying a strong vassal, so he gets onto friendly terms and doesn't develop an appetite to overthrow your character. You can go a step further and seduce a character. Here, my character has seduced his sister-in-law, the Duchess of Barcelona, by far the most powerful vassal in the realm, but we can take it a step further and romance them to secure her loyalty forever. If you want to remove a threat permanently, there's always murder. First in line to the emperorship in an imperial election, why not quicken that up a bit by assassinating the incumbent Basilius? Since he's pretty unpopular, 9 agents have joined the scheme, and more can be bribed into the plot, improving the success chance. Often schemes may be directed at your own characters. A rival brother may attempt a murder during a hunt. Ambitious ladies may try to seduce your character in an effort to increase their court influence, maybe your daughter-in-law, or maybe even your own son. Hey, I'm not judging. Intrigue schemes have a success chance and a secrecy chance. The most important part is making sure the scheme is successful, and the second most important part is making sure it's kept in secrecy. You certainly don't want to be found out as a murderer even after the job is done. Intrigue is thus a two-way street. You have to ensure that your own schemes are successful and kept under the shadows, whilst hostile schemes against your court are foiled and brought to light. It's a refined adaptation from its predecessor that, combined with the added systems in this edition, makes for some hilarious scenarios. In my Habsburg campaign, the King of Denmark sent a message that one of his vassals was due to travel through my domain in Argyle, and there's an opportunity here to either join the scheme and get some gold or alert the would-be victim, the success chance of which depends on the intrigue of my current character. Investing into the intrigue lifestyle tree opens up even more mechanics, such as the ability to abduct characters. Abduction is one of my favorite methods because it just makes things so much easier when they're locked up in a cell. How about abducting Charlemagne's great-great-granddaughter? Murder her husband. Force her to rescind Catholicism and take her as your concubine. Breed Charlemagne's blood into your dynasty. Yes, Crusader Kings III does not hold anything back. Sometimes dissent becomes a public affair, with factions fomenting against their character's rule. They can be minor peasant rabble that need to be periodically crushed, or more threatening pretenders attempting to usurp the crown, and this is all surmised in the factions window. For rulers, this tab is useful for seeing any potential threats to stability in their realm, whilst for vassals, it's useful for seeing any opportunities to threaten that stability. Once factions reach a certain military power and discontent level, they will deliver an ultimatum. As the Habsburg House, my first campaign objective was to break away from the Holy Roman Empire, and sensing weakness in the realm, my character, as a powerful duke, joined in a faction to gain independence. We sent an ultimatum, which was swiftly refused by the incumbent emperor, and so a civil war erupted. Eventually, we won the war. We gained our independence as the Kingdom of Switzerland alongside several breakaway duchies in northern Italy. Conversely, it's sometimes apparent that factions may be too powerful to oppose, and rather than risk civil war and certain defeat, it's wise to just cede to their demands. Back in that earlier example in my English campaign as the young King Leonel, a faction developed to install his uncle, Duke William the Red, onto the throne. I could, knowing that all hope was lost for this line of sons, to abdicate when the ultimatum came, instead of risking civil war, continuing my campaign instead as William II and eventually play out his line of the house. Don't be afraid to concede if it's all for the greater good of the dynasty. Crusader Kings III generates a list of decisions that can be undertaken by a landed character, and in some ways this can be seen as an objective list for dynasties to strive towards. The best comparison would be Hearts of Iron 4's National Focus Tree system, which gives the player more ambitious long-term strategic directions for their campaign. Major decisions in CK3 consequently leave a permanent mark on the world. Dukes can found their own kingdom, and kings can found their own empire when at sufficient prestige levels and realm size. An especially pious character can consecrate their house's bloodline, forever intertwining their lineage with their faith and earning the Paragon trait. Some decisions are unique to certain countries. The Byzantines, for example, have an entire decision block dedicated to dismantling the German pretenders from the Holy Roman Empire, unifying the Church by mending the Christian schism, or restoring the Roman Empire altogether. Whilst Iberian cultures have an endgame decision to unify the titles under the Spanish kingdom. On the flip side, characters will also have minor decisions available, and these can be done periodically as they usually have cooldowns or cost gold. Organizing a feast is a great way to interact with vassals. Or why not burn some stress out by going hunting? Or embark on a pilgrimage to a holy land of your choice to reaffirm one's fate. Finally, we'll take a look at how Crusader Kings III meshes all these mechanics and systems together with events. There are major historical events scripted to dramatically change the dynamic of the game world, such as the Hungarian migration, which begins in the late 800s, the rise of the Shia branch of Islam, which begins the breakup of the Abbasids in the 900s, or the Crusades, which begin in the late 11th century. By far the biggest late game event is the Mongol invasion, with the event chain scripted to fire in the early 1200s, spawning Genghis Khan and his bloodline. The empire will eventually expand and consume most of the eastern sections of the map. In one of my campaigns, they destroyed the Turkic Seljuk Empire situated in Persia and Mesopotamia. This is an extremely fun and impactful event chain that throws the world into chaos, opening up decisions such as even submitting to the Great Khan himself. On a smaller scale though, randomized events will fire pretty continuously concerning your own characters, their house, their realm, or the world at large, helping to complement Crusader Kings III's award-winning emergent gameplay. Many of these events can present themselves as a challenge, a chance to succeed based on attributes. This is bolstered by the addition of the Friends and Foes event pack, which adds more than 100 new events to the game, as well as the Royal Court DLC that adds some unique court-related events. It's hard to summarize them all, so I'll just give a few anecdotes I have gotten in my own campaigns. A monster terrorizes a local settlement. My character, the king, rides out with a group of guards to face the beast. As a passionate torturer and all-around dreadful character, the king seeks out a suitable candidate for his next debauched piece of art, carving an unlucky prisoner into a sculpture. The archbishop forcing my character to divorce my wife because he found evidence of incestuous claims, even though she's descended from a Czech dynasty. Or discovering my knight is an adultering homosexual because his lover made too much noise trying to climb into his window. As a child, players are limited mechanically, with many of the game's systems locked behind an age barrier, but interestingly, the game has its own set of child-related events to make playing as one not a dull affair. There's more control over what traits one can gain as a child with events such as this. Or your character truly affirms their heterosexuality by having a crush on a girl. Kids can make friends, or they can be bullied. You can also find a cat while strolling the forest, which gives an intrigue and learning buff. And although they can't eat and drink at a feast like the adults, children can also meet peers at a children-only social gathering event, providing various opportunities to acquaint with new people and develop new skills. For all its merits, CK3 does have its share of grievances, mostly as a result of its insane ambitiousness. Mechanically, I don't think military or realm management aspects were anywhere near of an improvement expected over Crusader Kings II. Despite all the advances in the character gameplay loop, the game still feels like it is being anchored down by the more simplified management side of things, but there's enough in the core gameplay loop to keep players mostly distracted. And although the game is meticulously crafted with each historical scenario, the simulation does tend to go a bit whack as the game progresses. This is further exemplified by the AI, which as the game wears on increasingly becomes chaotic, anarchic, and erratic, often becoming immersion breaking as well. This can be seen easily with empires collapsing in the scale of decades. The Holy Roman Empire always seems destined to disintegrate into various derivations, seen over many of my campaigns. The AI tends to also approve of disadvantageous marriages, which results in situations where a Russian dynasty is ruling Francia and a Czech dynasty is installed in the throne of England. The AI doesn't respect overextension and keeping to de jure territories, so you have situations where the capital of Hungary is an exclave within Denmark. Estonia is split into the Kingdom of Estonia and the High Chiefdom of Estonia. Or my Duchess Amis of Alexandria somehow having the county of Derby fighting a war against an earldom in an England that is bisected by a Scottish duchy. All in all, if you hate border gore, then strap yourself in. Crusader Kings III is the epitome of it. The AI recently got an overhaul with the most recent 1.7 patch. That's 2 years after release, but I haven't played enough of this update to make a comment on improvements. Finally, I think there is a case for lack of content. Mechanically, the game is almost perfect, but the content that layers on top of that is kind of lacking. Playing as different cultures and faiths is nowhere near as diverse as one imagines. It's almost like a different skin with slight tweaks to the gameplay. Only feudal Europe is thus really fleshed out and complete. Furthermore, this lack of content does nothing to alleviate the staleness of the late game, as besides the Mongol invasion, very little other scripted events are present. It's sort of like trusting the AI to generate an emergent narrative for you, and although it can be funny at times, I wish there was more historical backbone to complement the greater world at large. Crusader Kings III shines in its ability to pitch multiple methods to the player to achieve a goal, whatever it may be, in a truly multifaceted role-playing approach to game design that has paid off greatly. Players can take the tyrannical route and intimidate their opposition, play sneaky with underhanded tactics and intrigue, or appease others with a friendly, diplomatic disposition. Although Crusader Kings III has by far one of the toughest learning curves in a grand strategy game, it is also certainly one of the most rewarding. Overall, this is still one of Paradox Interactive's most mechanically strong titles to date. It seems that they have got all the fundamentals right, they just now need to expand the content around it further, which is very easily achievable with DLC. They've built a very sturdy house, now they need to install all the furnishings. Crusader Kings III has gotten only a lukewarm reception during its post-launch development, as a series of content delays, slow DLC releases, and pricing controversies have brought negative attention to Paradox Interactive. By the making of this video, Crusader Kings III has reached patch 1.7, the result of 7 major patches over the 2 years. As Paradox's arguably largest released current project, communication is constant with monthly developer diaries available on the forums, but it lacks any real roadmap to indicate future plans. These updates have been generally positive, tweaking mechanics and fixing bugs, and recently overhauling the AI, but has not delivered much free content, the area which Crusader Kings III has tended to stagger. It was hoped that the game would receive a steady release of DLC to compensate. However, with the game releasing pretty much in the middle of the COVID pandemic, we've seen only 4 content DLCs released over the 2 years, each with varying impacts on the game. The Northern Lords DLC was launched in March of 2021, the first flavor pack and the first DLC with playable content. Northern Lord's scope is all about adding uniqueness to playing a Norse faction, and although Norse characters and realms were already implemented into the base game, previously their gameplay loop and experience was virtually the same as a feudal lord in Europe. With the DLC installed, several features are available exclusively to the North Germanic heritage and Asatru faiths, i.e. the peoples of Scandinavia, the Vikings, and their Norse pagan religion. Viking characters can embark on a Varangian adventure, essentially packing up their entire realm and migrating their peoples to a county or duchy of a different culture. This gives the opportunity for players to relive the Viking Age, when Norsemen undertook large-scale raiding, colonization, and ultimately conquest of foreign lands throughout Europe. So, like Ragnar, who raided the British Isles, Rollo, who raided Normandy, and Robert, who raided as far as Sicily. Given that Norsemen already have access to the raiding mechanics and conquest casus belli as a result of their pagan warmongering faith, this allows them to easily capitulate foreign targets which may be unready to defend a surprise invasion. Interestingly, the Asatru Norse faith has holy sites in modern-day York in England, Paderborn in Germany, and Kiev in Ukraine, making for interesting locations to possibly adventure towards. Dynasties of North Germanic heritage can take advantage of two new dynasty legacies that assist the migratory and naval-based playstyle of the Vikings. The adventure branch increases diplomatic range, so more targets to declare war on, and unlocks the Send to Varangian Guard interaction. This is a useful tool for dynasty heads to disinherit sons or remove rivals of power by forcing them to serve in the foreign Byzantine Imperial Guard, the Varangians. It's similar to asking a Christian son to join a holy order as a knight. Occasionally, prospective adventurers may ask for their liege's permission to join the Varangians as well. Byzantine leaders can actually hire the Varangian Guard as a mercenary unit and may encounter these characters. The Pillage branch assists rulers who would rather raid than stay settled and civilized, improving naval speed, loot, and prestige from raiding. This branch is useful for raiding fleets to be sent effectively to far-off reaches of the world map, profitable raids on the British Isles and beyond where their castles and churches hold lucrative loot. The combination of these two legacies can make for a truly menacing experience unique to playing the Vikings. The DLC also introduces the Shield Maiden mechanic, a pathway for martial-educated females in your house to take up arms as a champion in your ranks, an especially useful addition for small realms that may not have access to a wide character pool to draw male warriors from. And rulers can eventually forge the Jomsvikings, a legendary Norse order of Viking mercenaries dedicated to fighting the spread of Abrahamic religions. These special soldiers can be hired by all Norse realms with a select few regiments directly inherited through the patron's succession line, becoming essentially an elite house guard unit. Finally, Norse cultures will have access to a variety of unique decisions. They can raise runestones for a price of gold, giving piety and prestige. Since Vikings are encouraged to constantly be at war, which requires prestige and piety for declarations and unit upkeep, and gold comes readily available through raiding and warfare, runestones greatly synergize with this chaotic playstyle as a resource feedback loop. Runestones can be dedicated to dead ancestors, defeated enemies, or a conquest, providing a buff to the county it is raised in. Norse cultures can also host a Grand Blot, a religious event in which nobles from across the Norse world are invited to take part in sacrifice rituals. Animals or even humans can be sacrificed to appease the gods, granting huge opinion and piety bonuses. There are also interesting decision chains based in historical precedents, such as the ability to found the Kievan Rus or form the High Kingdom of the North Sea. The Vikings is a very fun culture to play with this DLC. They have access to concubines and can even concubine their priest, with all bastard children considered legitimate. They have access to trial by combat as a form of judgment, useful for eliminating rivals or sibling claimants to titles, well, at least try to. With the multitude of Northern Lords events added, this DLC does exactly what it says on the tin, by giving flavour to the medieval age's legendary Viking culture, breathing life into its presentation, as well as with unique art and music. Any players considering a campaign of immersing themselves as a Norse character should definitely also consider the Northern Lords DLC. Announced only a couple of months after the Northern Lords released, Paradox promised huge additions to their Royal Court expansion. However, this was delayed until its February 2022 launch, almost a full year since Northern Lords, marking a hefty time period where the game's post-release development sort of stagnated. Royal Court nevertheless is by far the biggest content drop to date, which is why Paradox Interactive have labelled it as a true expansion pack and adds a multitude of features to further enhance the role-playing aspects of court life. The most notable and impactful change is the Throne Room, a royal court, that is unlocked when rulers obtain independent king or emperor status. In this screen, characters, their families, their courtiers, and visiting guests are all rendered in 3D, mingling amongst one another in a vibrant court atmosphere. Within this space, a range of events also occasionally trigger that are royal court exclusive. Your realm priest showing off her poor manners by burping loudly. Your illiterate leader struggles to sign a letter, so the priest offers to teach him to read and write. Or maybe you neglect to invest in court fashion, drawing the ire of scrupulous snobs criticizing the royal attire. Besides these events, rulers can also hold court every 5 years in the Throne Room, triggering 3 random petition events. This is essentially some representation of a ruler's judicial functions, correcting issues, resolving disagreements, and approving of projects proposed from different characters around the realm. This adds a bit more of a realm management spin on things, but I wish the petitions were more indicative of the state of the realm, rather than just 3 randomly generated ones picked from a pool. On the flip side, vassals can visit their liege's court and petition them. Early on in one campaign, as a Byzantine dukes, the reason why I was able to get so close and influential to the emperor in order to scheme his demise was my successful petition to become the marshal of the emperor, putting my character onto the council and thus into his inner circle. Or you can just show your loyalty. You can pay homage to your liege, hopefully without stumbling and making a fool of yourself. Royal Court introduces an indicator of how illustrious a royal court is by the measure of its grandeur. High grandeur levels attract more skilled guests in more numbers and unlock new counselor tasks and buffs to characters in court. Grandeur can be improved by spending upkeep on amenities, with each category also providing its own related buffs. Rulers can also change their court type depending on their cultural ethos. This determines additional bonuses at certain levels of grandeur, so a warlike court can gain knight effectiveness and men-at-arms performance, whilst the administrative courts reduce building costs and increase development. Court grandeur is also ranked in a global leaderboard against other royal courts around the world, so it gives some competition to try to field the grandest court of them all. A great feature to the Royal Court DLC is an expansion of the artifact system. It's no longer confined to objects characters can wear. Artifacts now encompass house emblems, books, artworks, furnitures, and other paraphernalia which can be then displayed in the throne room, impressing courtiers, providing powerful buffs, and increasing court grandeur. Scenarios begin with many historical artifacts scattered across the game world. The legendary crown of Justinian the Great is inherited through the Byzantine court. Charlemagne's skull cap and sword is in the French court, the seal of the Prophet Muhammad in Fatimid Egypt, and even a few imitation Excaliburs in the English court. Some are scripted to appear according to historical events, such as the Tale de Conquest, a tapestry depicting the Battle of Hastings and given to William the Conqueror upon his ascension. Similar to inventory items, these artifacts can be captured during sieges, gifted to characters, inherited through the family, intrigue or challenges can be performed. Even wars can be fought to reclaim lost artifacts. What's more, the Royal Court DLC adds a new way to create artifacts by sponsoring inspirations. Characters occasionally gain inspirations, traveling from court to court in an effort to seek a king or emperor to finance their venture. Sometimes it's forging an object directly, fashioning a new art piece, or going on an adventure to foreign lands in the hope of bringing back something exotic. Each inspired person also has a skill level, so you generally don't want to pass up an opportunity to forge something from someone considered a master by their peers. This synergizes with grandeur as well, where more highly skilled artisans will visit illustrious courts and offer their services. Hunting trips may also yield animal pelts, hides, and skulls for display. This is one of my favorite features in any of the DLCs, and it adds this museum curator style gameplay I didn't know I was missing before this. Consequently, Royal Court is my favorite DLC because it adds so much extra aesthetic on top of the whole experience, to the point where, yes, it does feel like a fully fledged content-heavy expansion pack of the old days. Perhaps even to the point where I'd even consider this DLC quintessential to the holistic experience of Crusader Kings III, especially because it expands on the base game's RPG elements like the inventory system. It adds a whole new visual experience with the court screen that just oozes the impression of watching medieval dramas like Game of Thrones or playing medieval social deduction games like Throne of Lies. The second flavor pack is Fate of Iberia, launched in May of 2022. From its namesake title, Fate of Iberia is an intimate focus on the continent of Hispania, from both sides, the Catholic kingdoms in the north and the Muslim realms of Al-Andalus in the south, that are pitched against one another in the Reconquista. The core mechanic to represent that is the struggle, a long-term conflict that affects every character present in the region with wide-spanning political ramifications. Involved characters in a struggle have unique interactions between them. They undergo phases which influence their playstyle for a given period of time. This DLC introduces a struggle for Iberia, but it's reasonable to expect struggles as a future introduced mechanic for other regions of the world. I can imagine one for England with the Anglo-Saxons trying to resist the Vikings, and eventually the Normans, or an Anatolian struggle with the Byzantines and the Seljuk Turks. Struggles can transition through 4 phases: opportunity, which can lead to either hostility or conciliation, both leading to compromise, and looping back to opportunity. At each phase, several modifiers embolden certain strategies for the entire continent. For instance, warfare is encouraged during the hostility phase due to all the military and casus belli buffs, whilst compromise phase encourages peacemaking, diplomatic overtures, and cultural acceptance. Struggles are therefore a creative and well-designed gameplay mechanic where periods of conflict and peace have an ebb and flow, which alternate as time goes on, each involved character given much more agency to influence not only the course of their future, but the future of others on their entire continent. Like the Northern Lords DLC, Fate of Iberia brings some distinction to playing as an Iberian culture, with custom art in the UI, new 3D models for characters, new court designs for the Royal Court DLC, new artifacts, events, decisions, and a pretty rich soundtrack. 2 new Dynasty legacies feature the Metropolitan and Coterie branch, with the former encouraging development and stewardship playstyles indicative of the infrastructure boom during the Reconquista period, whilst the latter allows for greater benefits from large dynastic families, promoting nepotism. There's also a chess minigame that's added, an opportunity to bolster relations and reduce stress in a friendly match, or wager gold, prestige, or even land in a betting match. However, it's a pretty rustic rock, paper, scissors minigame without much actual chess. Besides the defining struggle mechanic, many will feel that the Fate of Iberia DLC struggles to bring enough flavor compared to Northern Lords. In August of 2022, Paradox Interactive announced a price alteration of previous flavor packs to reflect the overall value of the type of content moving forward. As a result, the flavor packs of Northern Lords and Fate of Iberia were almost doubled in price, from $6.99 USD to $12.99 USD. This was seen as a callous and pretty unprecedented move, given that no new content was being retroactively added to those DLCs. The reasoning for this price adjustment was revealed a few weeks later with the announcement of the Friends and Foes DLC. This was the first of the lower tier DLCs that are not quite as heavy in content as flavor packs, with Paradox assigning this to a price point of $4.99 USD. So going forward, it looks like there will be smaller DLCs like Friends and Foes, mid-sized flavor packs like Northern Lords and Fate of Iberia, and larger expansion packs like Royal Court. So anyway, Friends and Foes launched in September 2022 to mark the 2nd anniversary of Crusader Kings III. Described as an event pack, Friends and Foes adds more than 100 unique events to complement the emergent gameplay loop around character interactions. It's a pretty self-explanatory pack with limited concrete content, as most of these events are random, and many may feel this should have been free content added into the base game. After all, it can be simplified as just a bunch of strings. Modding has been a critically fundamental part of any Paradox interactive game, and pleasingly that trend has continued into this latest installment of the Crusader Kings franchise. With full Steam Workshop integration and a reasonably decent launcher to compile mods, modding in general is super accessible. This is complemented by a well-established modding scene that has migrated en masse from Crusader Kings II, bringing a wealth of experience, ideas, and third-party tools that has propelled the scene to grow and grow in strength and number. So, if you dislike the official Paradox launcher, modders can download Irony Mod Manager, a personal favorite, and use PDX Unlimiter to manage and edit save games. Heck, the entire code of the game can be pretty much opened in a text editor and modded at will. So, what's the future like for CK3? Most outsiders and casual grand strategy fans probably would think the game is close to being finished after 2 years, but they don't know. Paradox games have a reputation for development well past the typical post-release lifespan compared to their contemporaries, and given the immensely positive reception from the greater crowd at large, CK3 is sure to be the beginning of a new Paradox cash cow I can assure you they intend to milk dry. Conversely, we must also be wary. We can already see some DLCs are more worth it than others, especially with the recent price adjustments, and Paradox are not known to be paradigms of value, so there will be probably garbage DLCs and there will be worthwhile gems. One of the most requested expansion directions is a flavor pack for the Byzantines. Currently, the Byzantines play almost exactly like any other feudal state, which is historically inaccurate and not unique enough as a compelling playthrough on its own right. Some features from other DLCs, like the implementation of the Varangian Guard from the Northern Lords, is a step in the right direction. I'm quite enjoying the mod called Roman Government. This turns the Byzantine political system into a bureaucratic government modelled after the late Roman imperial autocracy. It's an interesting stopgap mechanically, but I hope a DLC that also adds flavourful art, music, events, and decisions is considered. Furthermore, I would like to see a DLC that introduces a new scenario date around the late 1100s or the early 1200s, which provides access to a Mongol campaign where we can unite the tribes as Genghis Khan. This date also sees the height of the Third Crusades, where the Kingdom of Jerusalem struggled against Saladin's Ayyubid Sultanate of Egypt, and the height of the English Angevin Empire, which ruled half of France. This is the game that we've been waiting for since, well, Crusader Kings II. With an exceptional foundation, the only thing needed is improvements to make every culture and faith a unique playing experience, to really encapsulate the longevity of its predecessor. Without overextending the map, the third Crusader Kings reduces the amount of starting dates to instead build 2 meticulously detailed scenarios. The increased density of the world map allows for an even greater representation of historical characters, dynasties, and realms, 8 out of 10. The cleanup of the UI and the rendering of characters into 3D models is a huge achievement for grand strategy, let alone a Paradox title. The visual improvement from the second installment is most apparent. Crusader Kings III sets a massive benchmark for future games, 10 out of 10. The main focus of the game, the way characters are represented through all the subsystems and mechanics, is extremely detailed and promotes a rich architecture of RPG elements encapsulated in a grand strategy format that frankly has never been seen accomplished in any other game, 10 out of 10. Fundamentally an improvement in almost every way from its predecessor, the gameplay loop is addictive and unrestrictive, providing many avenues for players to craft their own emergent storyline in a continuously simulating world. Despite its shortcomings in military and realm management, this is a superbly deep game that will challenge as it will amuse, 9 out of 10. After 2 years, Crusader Kings III has reasonably improved from its DLC releases whilst embracing its mod-friendly conviction. Nevertheless, the somewhat slow progress of content and questionable anti-consumer practices have soured a lot of opinions. 6 out of 10. My final rating for Crusader Kings III is a triumphant 9 out of 10. And it isn't too far off from knocking out the 10 out of 10 slot in all honesty, but that's all dependent on future development and additions to its DLC library. Crusader Kings III has maintained its release price of $49.99 US, a very competitive price point for the mileage the game offers. Even then, it has been discounted by $10 consistently since launch, which frankly is an even bigger bargain. Its lowest price point was $33.49 USD during the 2022 Steam Lunar New Year sale. Nevertheless, I fully recommend a purchase of this game at its standard retail price. Some much appreciated uniqueness for campaigns in the northern sweeps of Scandinavia. Would have recommended this DLC outright before the price adjustment. Now I'd say get it on sale or with a bundled package such as the expansion pass. 7 out of 10. Truly builds upon everything Crusader Kings III does right to add even more immersiveness and character interaction. It's a quite expensive DLC though, at 60% of the base game price, but I do consider it an essential, worthwhile investment to the whole experience. 9 out of 10. Unless the struggle mechanic is paywall locked behind this DLC for future expansion of this mechanic, which I hope it's not, then there's very little reason to grab this unless you're considering playing as an Iberian character. Get it on sale or alongside a bundle. I wouldn't prioritize this. 5 out of 10. Realistically, this should have been free LC because it's fundamentally just extra strings. Maybe an ominous sign of a predatory DLC model coming in the future. 3 out of 10, get it on sale or not at all. Crusader Kings III has come out of the last 2 years a definitively richer and more fulfilling game. If you've made it to the end of this video, it's fair to say you can appreciate the almost infinite complexity and depth on offer in this title. But make no mistake, this title can be overwhelming. It is difficult and the learning curve is insane. Proceed past those entry barriers and you have one of the most rewarding medieval character simulators ever created. So go ahead, pick up your sword, pick up your crown and give Crusader Kings III a try. It'll be worth your while, or maybe your son's while, or maybe your grandson's while. Anyways, this was Crusader Kings III, 2 years in review. If you've enjoyed this edition of the Year in Review series, be sure to subscribe for more, and consider funding more analytical works like this through our Patreon for as little as $1 a month.